At 20,000 feet above Nazi-occupied Germany, Staff Sergeant Jack Turner gripped the frozen controls of his B-17, Frostbite, as flak burst around them. It was October 1943, deep inside the Reich, where American bombers from the 8th Air Force flew daylight missions. Without fighter escort beyond the Dutch coast, the sky over Bremen churned black with smoke and exploding shells, each burst a calculated attempt by German gunners to tear aluminum apart. Turner felt the fortress shudder, her four Wright Cyclone engines, straining against icy headwinds and the tight defensive formation. Holding steady, below him, the bomb bay doors yawned open, and the bombardier whispered corrections over the interphone while the Norden sight tracked the shipyards. Then the first direct hit struck their left wing, snapping metal and sending shards slicing through the waist compartment in blinding sparks. Sergeant Eddie Morales screamed as fragments tore into his leg, and the radio crackled with overlapping shouts. Discipline dissolving into raw instinct, Turner fought the yoke, forcing Frostbite back into line, knowing that drifting from formation meant isolation and certain destruction. Out of the smoke emerged another B-17, wounded and drifting, its tail nearly severed, sliding helplessly across the gray void between formations. The pilot of the other ship, Lieutenant Robert Hayes, struggled to maintain altitude as hydraulic fluid streamed like blood across shattered aluminum skin. German Messerschmitts slashed through the bomber stream, their cannon fire hammering exposed bellies before climbing away in disciplined arcs. A violent concussion rocked both aircraft as near-miss flak detonations flipped Frostbite sideways, momentarily blinding Turner with all-smeared windscreen glare. Hayes' crippled fortress drifted closer, drawn by converging flight paths and failing control surfaces neither pilot could fully command. "Hold her steady," Turner muttered, though his co-pilot lay slumped and conscious beside him, oxygen mask dangling uselessly. At 20,000 feet, small errors became fatal mathematics, and two massive bombers now moved toward each other with terrifying inevitability. The impact came not as an explosion, but as a grinding metallic shriek that vibrated through bone and cockpit glass. Frostbite's right wing sliced beneath Hayes' fuselage, tangling struts and spars in a violent embrace neither crew had trained to survive. Gunners in both aircraft stared across only feet of open air, wide-eyed Americans witnessing their own reflections in another shattered bomber. Engines screamed at conflicting angles, propellers biting air desperately, while aluminum skin peeled back like torn paper in the freezing wind. And as the two flying fortresses locked together above burning Bremen, Jack Turner realized they were no longer two aircraft but one impossible machine falling. The two bombers did not separate after impact. Instead, they held fast, metal fused by twisted spars and gravity tightening the bond. Jack Turner shoved the throttles forward, praying asymmetric power might wrench Frostbite free before both ships stalled and spun. But the right wing was pinned beneath Hayes' crippled fuselage, locking ailerons useless and turning coordinated flight into desperate improvisation. In the other cockpit, Lieutenant Robert Hayes felt his controls move without command, as if a ghost pilot now shared his yoke. Hydraulic pressure bled away in thin vapor trails, and warning lights flickered across a panel already spider-webbed with cracks. Between the tangled fuselages, freezing wind howled through ruptured aluminum, whipping maps and loose shell casings into the open sky. Waist gunners from both crews stared across a gap no wider than a farmhouse porch, disbelief eclipsing even the fear of death. "Don't bail out," Turner ordered over the interphone, voice steady despite the impossible geometry holding them together. He knew parachutes would tangle in spinning propellers if either aircraft rolled, and the German fighters still circled like hawks. A Messerschmitt dove again, hesitating at the last instant, when its pilot recognized the grotesque shape drifting below. The enemy fighter banked away, uncertain whether he witnessed wreckage or some deliberate American trick of formation. Inside Frostbite, engineer Frank Doyle feathered the damaged engines, reducing drag while praying the locked wings would not shear apart. Hayes cut power to his inboard engines, attempting to balance thrust against Turner's desperate adjustments. For a fleeting second, the combined mass stabilized, two bombers flying as one lumbering, a symmetrical beast above Bremen. Below, the shipyards burned where earlier bombs had struck, columns of smoke rising like dark pillars toward the struggling aircraft. Turner calculated altitude in quick glances. 18,000 feet now, losing hundreds every minute despite every ounce of power. Oxygen masks hissed as gunners reported ammunition low, yet none fired, aware that recoil might disturb the fragile equilibrium. Hayes' co-pilot, blood streaming from a scalp wound, leaned close and whispered, "We're still flying." Turner almost laughed at the absurd truth of it. Against physics and training manuals, they were not yet falling. But as control cables groaned and metal screamed between them, both pilots felt the same question tightening in their chests. How long could the miracle last? The combined aircraft shuddered as another pocket of flak burst nearby, the shockwave rippling through both fuselages like a hammer striking tin. Turner tightened his grip, realizing they were no longer fighting German gunners alone, but gravity itself. 17,000 feet now. The altimeter and winding steadily, each last 1,000 feet narrowing their shrinking margin of survival. Hayes adjusted trim with delicate movements, discovering that even inches of control input sent tremors through the interlocked frames. Between the aircraft, jagged aluminum teeth scraped and shrieked, threatening to sever the fragile structure holding them airborne. In Frostbite's nose compartment, the bombardier lay stunned, blood seeping beneath his helmet while smoke drifted from ruptured wiring. The smell of burning insulation mixed with cordite and cold oxygen, creating a metallic tang none of them would ever forget. Feather 3, Turner ordered calmly, sensing vibration worsening along the starboard side. Engineer Doyle obeyed instantly, reducing drag while praying the sudden shift would not twist Hayes' fuselage free. The adjustment worked barely and the monstrous silhouette steadied into a shallow, reluctant descent. German fighters circled at distance now, wary of the unpredictable debris field that might erupt if the bombers tore apart. Hayes risked a glance across the narrow gap and locked eyes with Turner for the first time. No radio bridged them, no command unified them, only silent understanding between two men sharing one impossible fate. 16,000 feet. Oxygen masks hissed louder as pressure shifted and frost crept along cracked cockpit glass. A sudden jolt snapped everyone forward when Hayes' tail section dropped another foot, metal groaning under unbearable strain. In the waist, Morales tied a tourniquet around his leg using parachute cord, jaw clenched against rising panic. "We can't land like this," Hayes' co-pilot muttered, stating the obvious with hollow disbelief. Turner knew he was right. No airfield in England was wide enough for two bombers welded wing to wing. Yet abandoning the aircraft meant surrendering injured men to parachutes over enemy territory already alive with patrols. And as 15,000 feet approached, Turner understood their only hope might be to fly this broken creature all the way home. 14,000 feet, and the air grew thicker, the combined bomber responding sluggishly as if resenting every command forced upon it. Turner eased the yoke left, discovering the locked wings allowed only the faintest degree of coordinated turn. Hayes matched the movement instinctively, adjusting throttle by inches to prevent their tails from fishtailing apart. The two aircraft no longer behaved like machines but like wounded animals bound together, reacting to pain rather than instruction. Below the clouds, the North Sea waited somewhere west, a gray expanse that might offer mercy if land could not. German flag thin as the formation moved beyond Bremen. Yet stray bursts still clawed at the stragglers. Frostbite and her unwilling twin lagged far behind the main bomber stream, isolated against an empty sky. A lone Messerschmitt returned, approaching cautiously from below, its pilot studying the grotesque silhouette. Turner saw it coming and resisted the urge to fire, knowing recoil might snap their fragile alignment. The German fighter closed within 1,000 yards, cannon ports aligned, propeller flashing in cold sunlight. Then, astonishingly, it broke away again, banking slowly as if granting respect to doomed adversaries. Inside Hayes' aircraft, a rear gunner crossed himself, whispering thanks into the oxygen-thin air. 13,000 feet now, and vibration intensified along the junction, where right wing neck crushed fuselage. Rivets popped like distant gunshots, tiny flashes of silver vanishing into the slipstream. Turner reduced power slightly, gambling that slower airspeed might ease the grinding strain between them. The descent shallowed again, but altitude bled away relentlessly, the altimeter needle indifferent to courage. Over the interphone, Dorr reported fuel imbalance. Frostbite's left tanks were nearly dry from compensating thrust. Hayes faced the same arithmetic, calculating how long to damaged bombers could share dwindling gasoline. England lay more than 100 miles away, a distance that felt immeasurable in their crippled state. And as 12,000 feet approached, both pilots silently wondered whether the sea below would become their only runway. 11,000 feet, and the North Sea finally appeared through broken cloud, a cold steel surface reflecting fractured sunlight. Turner felt a grim temptation to ditch immediately, to end the strain before the wings tore free midair. But ditching to fused bombers meant unpredictable roll, and trapped men might drown inside twisted aluminum coffins. Hayes seemed to reach the same conclusion, keeping his throttles balanced instead of surrendering to the sea below. Over the interphone, Morales reported he could still man his gun. Despite the tourniquet biting deep into his leg, Turner admired the stubborn courage. yet knew every additional minute airborne risked catastrophic structural failure. 10,000 feet, oxygen masks came off, cold air rushing raw into lungs already burned by cordite and fear. The combined aircraft responded slightly better in denser air, controls marginally firmer beneath trembling gloves. For the first time since impact, Turner considered the possibility of steering deliberately toward England. Hayes edged his rudder carefully, testing whether the strange Union could hold a shallow western heading. The bomber beast answered with a groan but obeyed, pivoting degrees at a time toward distant safety. Behind them, Bremen faded into smoke, the city shrinking beneath the improbable silhouette crossing its sky. German coastal batteries opened fire again, their shells bursting lower now, more erratic but still lethal. A near explosion peppered Hayes' tail, shredding fabric control surfaces that barely functioned already. The entire structure lurched violently, and for a breathless second both bombers rolled toward the sea. Turner countered with full opposite input, muscles straining as if physically holding the aircraft upright. WWII shouted, engine temperatures climbing, overstressed motors protesting the uneven load they carried. 9,000 feet, waves below grew distinct, whitecaps visible between drifting shadows of cloud. Hayes caught Turner's eye again across the narrow void, silently asking the same unspoken question. Could they nurse this broken miracle across open water before physics finally demanded its price?